so we have a 10-minute count. I can cut into that sooner, but I just let the stream go. Then we get Facebook or YouTube. All right, stream is up on YouTube. We're going live there too as well. Let me just share this out. Pretty certain our audience can hear us talk right now, Michelle, so.
Good to know.
Yeah. Okay. So we're good there. I want everybody that might be hearing, a few people have already popping in. I want everybody that is actually considering tuning in, that they actually hear me talking behind this. So it's usually, for some reason, my audio that seems to kick up the most fuss. So we're almost there. I'm just going to make sure that we've got Facebook giving us love. Minutes. I just want to push this out to Twitter.
Doing it now too.
Yeah, Facebook just does not make things easily to share to Twitter. I don't even actually know how to get a link to this. Just share it to Twitter. Huh. All right. Well, I'm going to focus on other things. Okay. Two minutes. Okay, so I think we should go. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brent Stafford, and this is RegWatch by RegulatorWatch.com. Some disturbing news today out of the White House. U.S. President Donald Trump seems to have jumped in on the anti-vaping bandwagon in a big way. It is Trump's war now, it seems to be. He is joined with the progressive left in the battle against vaping. Joining us today is Michelle Minton from the Competitive Enterprise Institute, who is the senior fellow there and an avid, I wouldn't say, I don't know, would you call yourself a supporter of vaping?
I'm definitely a big supporter of consumers' rights to make their own choices. At this point, really, it's hard for me to not say that I'm a proponent of vaping when it comes to smokers. The evidence is just so clear.
So what do you think is going on here, Michelle? Because you're in Washington. We had you on earlier in the year when you were discussing the Fear Profiteers report that you had put out, which was fantastic. And it discussed basically the collusion of the nonprofit pressure groups with the public health agencies, FDA, CDC, and of course the state health departments. So you really do have your finger on the pulse of this issue. Walk us through what you think today's developments mean.
I mean, this is just another political grandstanding, opportunistic move when it comes to the vaping issue. There have been so many stories over the last 2 or 3 months about this outbreak that's supposedly linked to vaping, even though from the very beginning, everybody was saying, you know, most of these people seem to be reporting cannabis use. And in fact, a lot of them are reporting black market cannabis products. And now we are narrowing in on exactly why black market cannabis products seem to be causing these problems. And, you know, unsurprisingly, the news media is not as interested in the story anymore now that it is becoming clear that e-cigarettes have very little to do with it. What's happening this week, today, is that a lot of members of Congress, some politicians, some very wealthy special interests have decided that it's a great time to push past the debate that's been going on for several years and just force down the throat of the country what they want. These bans on flavored e-cigarettes, even though it has nothing to do with what's going on. And the evidence, we just saw another randomized controlled trial come out in the last week or two showing that e-cigarettes were far more effective, nearly 4 times as effective as the patch alone. But nobody seems to care. Well, at least nobody in government seems to care about the actual evidence or the data or what their rules would do to real human beings. So they're just jumping on to make a big name for themselves or please special donors or just anything. It's pure opportunism.
Yeah, it definitely seems that way. And I made a crack to you when we were talking on the phone earlier, which in my mind actually is definitely true. The big concern that we've always had when it came to President Trump was the fact is that for Republicans, taking an anti-vaping position is basically a win-win for them. It's an easy way to appease social justice warriors and virtue signaling by getting on the bandwagon and working across the aisles. It's very easy to be able to do that. So I haven't really seen that there was going to be much hope to get Republicans to really support vaping.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been saying for years to Republicans and Democrats that the cannabis issue, legalizing marijuana, is a win-win for everybody because it's what the public wants. There's a lot of evidence that prohibition just has caused so many problems. We're seeing that this summer with cannabis already. In a good way, a lot of members have recognized that opportunity and are now starting to use it as a really good platform to show that they're cool, they're hip. Even if they're Republican, they're down with legalizing weed. Unfortunately, the opportunism has spread to the vaping issue. Yes, it's a win-win for most people, especially when you have folks like Michael Bloomberg out there throwing around hundreds of millions of dollars. You know, we just saw the news story that he gave $160 million to the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. Don't kid yourself if that's the only check he's written over the last couple of weeks. I'm sure that he is also spending a lot of money in Congress and in state houses as well.
Yeah, that is. I mean, it's a disgusting amount of money, and most of it is all going just straight to propaganda.
Absolutely, and that's why I cracked a joke on Twitter with the recent news about Bloomberg's donations that whenever I encounter someone who's very anti-vaping, very vocal, I try to engage most of the time and talk to them and see what they know, what they think they know, and see if we can have a civil, honest conversation about the evidence, express each other's, listen to each other's opinions functionally, and almost without variation, at some point the person just accuses me of being a shill for Juul or Big Tobacco or one of the other, and walks away confident that they're right and I'm wrong. Because if they weren't, I would listen to them if I wasn't a shill.
Right, exactly. So for them, it's an ideological issue, no doubt, when it should be one that's just about pure public health. And we understand that it definitely is something that's about ideology. It's because the CDC's refusal to clear up the confusion that they're largely responsible for creating by continuing to use the term e-cigarettes and vaping and downplaying the THC aspect of it. We had Dr. Michael Siegel on the show on Monday evening, and he outlined how in the August 30th guidelines, an alert that the CDC sent out to health professionals all across the country, and outlining all the things that they're asking them to do in terms of helping them identify what the cause is of this lung illness. Nowhere in there is the CDC asking for urine or blood tests. So basically, they're just saying, go through this whole process and we're just going to rely on what the teenagers self-report. And
it's absolutely insane.
It's insane, yes.
I mean, no research study with any kind of clout would ever say, yeah, we're just going to go with self-reporting data. What people, we're going to ask people how many sodas they drink a week, and we're just going to believe that it's exactly accurate. Researchers know that there's memory problems. Some people have their own reasons for not wanting to tell the truth about their behaviors. When it comes to cannabis, in almost every single one of these states, we're talking about illegal activity. And as far as I can tell, the CDC provides no guarantee to the people they interview about anonymity or immunity from prosecution down the line. So why on God's green earth would these people, especially younger people underage who have parents that they're probably more afraid of than the government, why would they be honest with the CDC? And even still, most of the cases have been linked to black market cannabis. There's something massively wrong with the CDC, as demonstrated by what they've been doing over the last 2 weeks. They are willfully denying the public information that could save their lives.
Yeah, and that's really the trick, isn't it? Here, I've got the severe pulmonary disease associated with using e-cigarette products, which is the official CDC health advisor. You can see that, Michelle?
Yes, I see that, and it's strikingly different with the announcement made by the FDA on the same day, I believe, where the FDA was very clear that it seems that most of them, if not all of them, are linked to cannabis products.
Yeah, so I mean, how could the CDC say that THC vape pens are e-cigarettes? I mean, isn't that just a pure lie?
No, it's clearly propaganda because they know that people who use cannabis products, even those who vape cannabis products, would never refer to them as e-cigarettes. And I do see that in the announcement they say a lot of different terms that people might use, e-hookahs, e-vapes, whatever. But a lot of these people people who use cannabis don't call them e-cigarettes at all. The emphasis on e-cigarettes is clearly an attempt to connect these very widespread stories to traditional, over-the-counter, legal e-cigarettes so that the CDC can push its agenda, which I really hope when the CDC director, Redfield, is before Congress on the 24th, that they ask him about this. They ask him why there's a disconnect between what the FDA is saying, what the CDC is saying, and what all of the state health departments are saying, and what on God's green earth the CDC was thinking.
Yeah, and they're still doing it, right? So exactly here in the general background, why have an entire paragraph of the general background of e-cigarettes? They're actually full on calling it the electronic nicotine delivery systems and ENDS. Why even ENDS is even a discussion at all with this health alert this is the poison. This is the treachery of the CDC right here, perfectly for you to see as they frame the entire issue as an ENDS issue. When it's not. It's about illegal black market THC products. I mean, that's as simple as that. And so, and as Dr. Siegel pointed out, as you get through, here again, young adults, pregnant women, tobacco products should not use e-cigarettes. E-cigarettes containing nicotine have the potential to help. Why they're even talking about that is for only one reason, and that's to confound the issues and to indict e-cigarettes in the deaths of young people in the United States in order to create a hysteria that ends up being where we are today, where you have President Trump, who clearly is not as informed as he should be on this issue, and coming out of the FDA today, and let's just go there, is Trump administration combating epidemic of youth e-cigarette use with the plan to clear market of unauthorized, non-tobacco flavored e-cigarette products. And so the FDA is going to, basically rush its compliance policy to prioritize enforcement of pre-market authorization requirements for non-tobacco flavored e-cigarettes. I'm going to just read the first three paragraphs here, and this is just out today. FDA, it landed in my inbox just a little bit before 3 p.m. Eastern. Today, the Trump administration announced that as a part of its ongoing work to tackle the epidemic of youth e-cigarette use, the FDA intends to finalize a compliance policy in the coming weeks that would prioritize the agency's enforcement of the pre-market authorization requirements for non-tobacco flavored e-cigarettes, including mint and menthol flavors, clearing the market, and this is the big thing here, clearing the market of unauthorized non-tobacco flavored e-cigarette products. FDA plans to share more on the specific details of the plan and the implementation soon. And here's the quote: the Trump administration is making it clear that we intend to clear the market of flavored e-cigarettes to reverse the deeply concerning epidemic of youth e-cigarette use that is impacting children, families, schools, and communities, said Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar. Quote, we will not stand idly by as these products become an on-ramp to combustible cigarettes or nicotine addiction for a generation of youth. So what do you think of that, Michelle?
Yeah, no, of course, on-ramp, lots of talk. No talk about the fact that most companies have already taken their flavored e-cigarettes, most of them out of the retail market anyway, and no mention of the fact that smoking rates are lowest, or they're the lowest ever in all age groups. So if e-cigarettes are a gateway, you would think we would see that by now, but that's a fact, and facts don't seem to matter for a lot of these people. It's just either let's do what feels good, let's do what pleases our donors, or let's just grandstand, make a big name for ourselves. And it's not just politicians. You can see it happening at the CDC and the FDA being opportunistic, or what I would call predatory. So it's regulatory predation on the part of the FDA, sending out complaints to Juul right now. Complaints, by the way, that are absolutely ridiculous, that in any court of law would be immediately thrown out, but they know that Juul can't fight it right now because of all these news stories, plus the regulatory threat, plus the fact that they're about to go to the FDA hat in hand and ask them to legalize their product, to officially allow them to keep their products on the market. So, held over a barrel, of course they're not going to fight back. And that's what the CDC is doing, that's what Trump is doing, that's what all of these people are doing. Some of them may be genuinely ignorant about the information, but people like Dr. Siegel, myself, Clyde Bates, so many others, people who are actual scientists, have been doing their damnedest to inform the people who are making these decisions, and they do not seem willing to listen.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's true, no doubt. I find it a little strange that FDA's press announcement here doesn't mention the deaths. So the means to an end has been achieved, and now let's not even talk about the means. So FDA doesn't need to talk about the means here in this issue, right? So that whole scare seems to be separate from this particular issue with Trump, although we know they're connected, of course.
Yeah, absolutely connected. I mean, I do have to give credit to the FDA a little bit of credit, that they are being slightly more careful than the CDC about just outright lying, just obvious lies that the CDC is putting out to the FDA, saying, at least mention cannabis. I think, I don't know why they're not talking about the death now, but yes, I think potentially what's happening is they don't want to draw more attention to that story, like you said, because if we keep going back to that story, if the news keeps investigating that story, we are going to have answers about what happened, and it is not going to be the answers that a lot of these people who are trying to ban e-cigarettes want them to be.
Yeah, because in the end, of course, it has nothing to do with e-cigarettes. And then the other thing where the health agencies are exposed, including the FDA, because they weren't so clear the whole way through. It's only recently that they become clear. So has there been anybody that's gotten sick or even potentially died, after the CDC and FDA were already communicating warnings to the public? And if those warnings were confusing, which they were, or incorrect on purpose, then there could be some exposure for them. Yeah,
I hope that they would be held responsible. So far, I haven't seen the CDC or the FDA really held responsible for any of their behaviors, but this is so blatant malfeasance that I think it is absolutely time for someone to hold them accountable. I don't expect the upcoming congressional panel to do so. This is the same panel that held the Juul hearings, which were just a platform for a couple of members to sound really good to their constituents who already agree with them. Lawsuits, some kind of an independent investigation, I believe, needs to be done. The CDC needs to be forced at this point to actually give the public their records, because FOIA requests are just denied by the CDC. I assume because they don't want people to actually see what they've been talking about, their strategy, because if they did, then we would have a real case that, the CDC, there are people there who do good jobs, especially when it comes to infectious disease outbreaks. These people sometimes put their lives on the line going in to try and figure out and help with outbreaks of infectious disease. However, this whole episode has really made me, and I'm guessing quite a few other people, question the value of the CDC when they're putting so much money towards what, as you said, is essentially propaganda. That is not what they're there for, and if that's what they're going to do, maybe we need to start sending our money to a different agency and get rid of this one.
Yeah, well, it's certainly true, because when they raised the alarm nationally and got that first round of national headlines back on the 22nd, I think, of August, 23rd of August, you had CBS National News with a huge chyron up with CDC in the logo and the chyron, and it said that the CDC does not know what brand it is, what substance it is, what product it is. CDC doesn't know. And like so much so that, it's like lie in plain sight, right? So, if your national news organization going, CDC doesn't know anything, but yet they're raising the flag and blaming e-cigarettes, right? So that's just, irresponsible that's just not even strong enough. I keep following back to the word treachery.
It's criminal. It's criminal. The CDC is saying they do not know. Yes, we don't conclusively know which products are causing all of the illnesses, frankly, because I believe I can't remember, it was Dr. Michael Siegel who said it, the diseases are so diverse. There's absolutely no way they're all caused by the same thing.
Yeah,
Most of
that was Dr. Pelosa on our on that very day that we did that coverage.
yes, so most of them appear to be lipoid pneumonia, which is caused by fat getting into the lungs most of the time, and that would be explained by some kind of adulterated cannabis oil. The CDC saying they don't know is an outright lie, or they're not doing their job coordinating with the states, because by that point, many of the states had already begun testing products from the patients and were very clear that they had a good idea what type of product was involved with most of these cases. So the CDC saying, we don't know. They didn't do this. They didn't say anything like that when there was an outbreak at the same time of salmonella. They didn't say, outbreak linked to food or even outbreak linked to chicken. They said backyard poultry, which is I'm buying a chicken from my neighbor down the yard, has been linked to 1,000 cases of salmonella and several deaths. News didn't pick up on it. No one really cared. But the CDC got exactly what it wanted by being as confusing as they possibly could, bordering on criminal. And I do really hope people take this seriously, because this isn't, yes, lives are on the line when it comes to e-cigarettes because they can save smokers' lives down the road who would otherwise die from smoking-related diseases. We are talking about acute death with what's been happening over the summer, and the CDC has just let people lie down in the road and get run over, which they should be held to account for this.
Yeah, and you would hope and wish that mainstream media would do a much better job, but we certainly know that if there's one agency, or if there's one group of agencies that media pretty much takes everything, verbatim, it's always public health. Sometimes, depending on the administration and whatever's going on at that particular moment in history, they may or may not fully take, the Defense Department or, the Attorney General, Justice Department. They may not always take that verbatim, but rarely does the media push back on public health. I can't.
That's my one hope with Trump getting involved is, sure, do we need another uneducated, ignorant voice in this already heated debate? No, we don't. But Trump getting involved might actually take opportunistic journalists and convince them that this is worth looking into a little bit more critically than they've been doing in the past. That they can now look into it and say, I wonder why a Republican is suddenly involved in this. Maybe this is not a great idea.
So, yeah, well, maybe normally, if we were to follow protocol here, the media hates everything the president supports. So this could very well have been a possible, good thing for Trump to launch a war on vaping, because then the media would get behind it. But the problem is, though, is that the media is just so far in the bag when it comes to being anti-vaping. And then you got Bloomberg, like you said, pumping in $160 million more than the hundreds of millions of dollars that he's already pumped in over the years. And a lot of people don't know this about Bloomberg, but he's got this, one of his groups has put together this side effort about 2 years ago. Nobody sees this, but it's an effort to intimidate ad agencies. So your creative agencies, your PR agencies, your media planning and buying agencies are all, getting shunned by this group that is, ostensibly funded by Bloomberg in order to say within the ad agency and public relations world, do not touch vaping or you are going to die. We are going to burn you.
Nothing tells you that a certain group of people are completely motivated by morality and have no scientific basis for what they want than when they start excommunicating people. And I think Dr. Michael Siegel said this. I'm not sure about Dr. Pelosa, but scientists are being excommunicated. They are being blocked out from the scientific discussion. Dr. Mariva, same thing happened to her from New Zealand. They are being excommunicated. And that's what you do in a religion. And I have no problem with people having a religion, but not when it comes to science policy and regulatory policy that affects real people's lives.
Right. Well, I think that the war on smoking in its original form is, in peacetime, is the only representation of really the exportation of liberty of just such a massive amount of people. So if you liken yourself to be a progressive left, which leans in that totalitarian tendency, and you want to control people, well, one of the things, if you've got a disgust for tobacco, is to, really control that and take away people's liberty there. And by taking away people's liberty with smoking, they're able to do that not based on what is good for the smoker, but really for the health of everybody else. And once you cross that line, then all these other things freedoms and liberties can be taken away, because you no longer have the ability to prove that I'm an individual, and you have to first prove that what I'm doing is harming others before you can take my liberty away. And I think that's one of the reasons why they're fighting so hard on this. There's a whole bunch, but I think that's one of them. They just got a sheer disgust for smokers, and that means a sheer disgust for vapors. I think that they had planned on breeding out the whole group of adult smokers. They pretty much threw them under the bus, and they figured they had their plan with this generation of young people, and they got them under their thumb, got that, their plan was going well, and vaping undermined that. So there's a bunch of things that I think that are going on from an ideological point of view. So I 100% agree with you. I'm going to toss this at you here too right now, and this is a wild one. But we did a piece a couple of years ago called "Dirty Tactics" and how climate change science poisoned vaping science. Because all of the things that you just described right now, and what others on our show have recently described, are exactly what happened in the climate change debate years ago. Ideology took over, denunciations took over, ex-nominations happened. We ex-nominate the scientists that are heretics, and then we see how far that can go. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It even goes further back than climate science. It started with toxicology. And there's this something that's been going on that I've been looking into a lot. It really started with the early progressive era movement. So we're talking about the late 1800s, early 1900s, where science was used in so much as that it was effective. Early progressives at that time were doing some good things like trying to get women to vote and get rid of slavery, reform labor laws. They were very interested in science and medicine, some of it pseudoscientific, of course, like eugenics, but they used it so long as it was evidence for what they wanted. When it doesn't comply with what they want, when it doesn't support their theories, then it's just out the window. And that happens with toxicology. That happened with, I'm not as familiar with climate science, but it's definitely happening here. And a lot of people have been talking about it. It happens with nutrition science as well. If you look at the debate around sodium, where that has been contentious for, people don't even realize, for about 30 or 40 years now. And some very reputable scientists have been saying this appears to be an argument between religious factions at this point, not a discussion about the data. So science has been moving the ball about what is acceptable science for a long time, which is why with vaping, I think people who are tobacco harm reduction folks have been reaching out. We've been talking to the other side and saying we need to come together to at least find some consensus on what is acceptable evidence. What terms are we going to use? This kind of a thing. And we've gotten nothing. Crickets on the other side.
Mm-hmm. I've got two big questions still left for you, and then you just let me know how much more time we have with you after that. And I know our audience is really enjoying the conversation. The chat stuff here has been fantastic. So two big ones. First, you mentioned that it's important to give FDA a bit of, not a pat on the back, but let's just say, they came to their senses. They came to their senses in time, to where they didn't bury their reputation completely. So that is kind of actually startling and amazing. And I think we can see a little bit of that in the way that this statement came out from FDA. But I want to address that, because I'm not going to give FDA an opportunity to get so off the hook here, because they're the ones that started this. It was September 17th last year when the entire vaping policy, which was moving forward in a rational, common sense way, that then Commissioner Scott Gottlieb had set a path on the year before. And he came out and he said that it was an epidemic of youth use, right? An epidemic of teen vaping. And so not only did he say epidemic, but he also said it poses a clear and present danger. So those are the kinds of words, well, those are definitely technical terms that a public health agency uses to take civil liberties away.
Yes, absolutely. Right. And then, what we saw was FDA got more power, they got more money. I think, no, you're absolutely right. FDA does not get to be let off the hook on this. just only by the fact that they are not so ballsy to think that they can get away at this point with straight lying, or that they're being opportunistic and saying, if we keep drawing attention to this one instance that we were wrong and where people died and it was definitely not linked to e-cigarettes, it'll hurt our efforts down the line. You're even seeing Scott Gottlieb, of all people now, on Twitter, on social media, talking about how cannabis is the problem, not e-cigarettes, because cannabis is unregulated, or the states can't regulate it appropriately, which at this point makes me think that Pfizer, on which Gottlieb sits on the board, Pfizer is potentially going to be getting into the legal cannabis market, so he wants to make sure that this entire other market is shut out, that the federal government has control over it, so that it's much easier for Pfizer to take over. I'm not sure. But no, FDA doesn't get off the hook. They were involved in the ramp up of the hysteria. They made way for everybody else. They made the public believe that the hysterics were correct. And now they're backing off a little bit. I wouldn't expect to see them back off for very long.
So that's a good point, and I think that's accurate, like right down to the core. So let's see if we can dig into some of the nooks and crannies here. Back in January, when we had John, it was towards the end of January, for Fear Profiteers. Let's talk about that for a minute, because you had an extraordinary ability to get in and see communications between some of these public health groups with state agencies, health agencies, and so forth, and were able to map out and come to the conclusion and show that there was a collusion going on these issues. So based on what you knew then, is that same actual apparatus just, totally going radioactive here? And if so, have you been able to look into any of those networks or, nooks and crannies and find anything of interest that you could share with us?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. This is definitely what's happening now. It's clear coordination. A lot of the public health departments were just waiting, praying, even though it goes against their mission to want harm to come to the public. They were praying for exactly what happened over this summer, that they could use it. I don't have any hard evidence right now because FOIA requests take a long time. Except for Delaware, credit to Delaware. Most state public health departments will delay your FOIA as long as they can. When it comes to the CDC, it's usually a year. And even then, all you get is a denial that you would have to go to court to fight. So there is obvious collusion here, not just with the health departments from the WHO on down to the local health departments, but it also includes business people. And, like I said, I do not expect the large e-cigarette companies to fight a lot of this. As many of you know, they've been pushing for the same thing at this point, the flavor ban. I would be surprised if Juul didn't try and at least get their products available via online, because that's a huge portion of their market. That's, mango is their most popular flavor. So I'd be surprised if they didn't try and get some concession, but they are not going to fight an overall federal ban, especially if it gets rid of their competitors. And, I don't blame Juul for that they're a company, they're fighting for their lives here. They've been fighting for their lives for more than a year now. So they're just going to do what they can to get theirs. And unfortunately, it's everybody else who's going to suffer with what's going on.
Okay, absolutely. And I just want to let everybody know that Michelle is kind enough to let us know that she's going to be able to stick with us until about 5:15, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Great. So we've got her for a little bit while longer. And it's hard for me to do both at the same time, but I will try to monitor the stream. So if there's one or two questions that I see pop up from one of our viewers for Michelle, I'll try to get that in peppered in here in our little bit left with Michelle.
I saw someone just mention prohibition, which I briefly touched on, but all of this tobacco control, modern tobacco control, stems from the same ideology that was bubbling around before prohibition during temperance. It's the same binary of people who smoke, or people at that time, people who drink, are either childlike savage victims or they are savage perpetrators. What it is the demonization of fun. And I'm, maybe this is a little hyperbolic, but if you look at the people who are fighting e-cigarettes versus the people who use them, who believe that they save their lives, the one side is decidedly rich and white, and the other side has a little bit more diversity. Early era progressives who were fighting for temperance, but we are seeing the exact same arguments they were making, that so tobacco companies are taking advantage of the poor little savages, and we need to protect them so that they can become good, civilized members of society, which to a lot of people on that side are rational, temperate. You don't engage in fun things. You're not oversexed or using drugs. You're rational. And there's something inherently racist about that value system that they're trying to force onto everybody else. They can't say nicotine is harmless, because if they do that, then they would have to start making the argument that we just don't want people to do it because it's fun.
So I've made an argument, pretty strong one, over a couple of episodes. So let me throw it out at you. I think that there is a disgust. I think the same people that hate America, that are anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism, that think that America is tainted by being racist from, 1619 forward, they're the same ones that are anti-vaping, anti-nicotine vehemently. And that's because they see that tobacco, America would not have been born, or at least not have succeeded without tobacco. And of course, it was the tobacco trade, which was hugely big driver of the slave trade. So tobacco, cotton, that kind of thing. So it's definitely, I think that there's something wired into the anti-American thing that's part of why they hate nicotine.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the anti. Yeah, but I mean, if you look at tobacco, it's a great example because it was an indigenous product. It was something that indigenous people used for fun and religious practices and social practices, and it was adopted by Western European colonial settlers, and then it was demonized. Alcohol was seen as a thing that immigrants use, especially Eastern European immigrants. And saloons were a place where laborers gathered to talk about things, including politics, and organize. Marijuana was a Mexican drug that, and alcohol was definitely seen as something that African Americans at the time, that it caused them to do horrible things. And I think a lot of what we're seeing, this is the first time I've thought of this, and I'm not sure if it's just way over the top, but this is the new, with the e-cigarette stuff, this is the new kill the Indian, save the man. If you know what I'm talking about, that's when they ripped indigenous children away from their, and this was a progressive policy meant to help the indigenous people by force assimilating them, by taking away children and putting them into boarding schools and forcing them to speak English, forcing them to dress like colonial settlers and not practice their culture. And that's what we're getting now with e-cigarettes, is that progressives are trying to save us. They're trying to save people who use e-cigarettes, whether they like it or not. Either you join with them or you leave their society, because that's someone who uses nicotine, no matter how harmless it is just not acceptable in their utopian ideal. And that's very problematic, and I'm shocked that more people aren't talking about it.
Well, I mean, it's because, it's tough to get your head around. It's very difficult for people to pin down what the progressives think, right? Because they are very much impacted by, American philosopher William James. So you've got pragmatism, involved there. So that means, you can take a bunch of different positions on either side in the goal of being pragmatic on issues, and that really does confuse things. I mean, they are the ones that redefined classical liberalism into liberal, right? They stole the word liberal. I mean, they build their entire ideology on stealing language and co-opting it, and then keeping the word but making it something different. And if it still got the same thing in terms of a definition, they use that too, right? It's like the word freedom. Freedom to a progressive doesn't mean at all the same thing as freedom does to somebody who's a classical liberal. Their freedom, and this will go to what you're discussing, their freedom is Rousseauian freedom. And so Jean-Jacques Rousseau's concept of freedom is one. So how do you balance the two issues, one of authority and one of freedom? Because complete freedom means absolutely no authority. You can do whatever you want. Nobody can tell you what to do. That's what freedom is. And then authority, of course, is the other side of that coin, and you need it to balance that off. And almost every single discussion from ancient Greece to through every political organization you can think of, it's that trying to split the baby there and find that way to put freedom and authority together. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was like diehard for freedom, exactly where there is zero constraints. So how do you square that? And he squared that by saying that freedom and authority are two sides of the exact same coin. They're the exact same thing. And so you have complete freedom when you live in a world of constraints, of authority that you have accepted yourself, like that you internalized yourself. So you are not actually being constrained if you believe that that self-control that you're exercising is the true example of virtue. And
Yeah.
so
If you imagine that there are no chains on you, you're free.
that's right, and everyone says with Rousseau, he makes that thing that says everyone's born free and lives in chains. What he actually was, he wasn't talking about slaves. He was actually talking about his concept of freedom and authority together. That if you are living in the right, proper way, you are chained yourself. You are in control of your own chains. And so, and the idea here is that if you go through this process, this inner process of discovering what that is, then and fully understanding it, then you look at the people around you, and you expect them to go through the same rational process of coming through that inner self, looking up for that virtue. And of course, because the world is supposed to be in harmony, that's the understanding, the progressive understanding of the harmony of the world. And because the world's supposed to be in harmony, two people should come to the same conclusion of what virtue is and have that self-control. And so they try to mitigate it with other people to get you in that same spot so they can feel that's good. But when you finally realize that that person or group of people that are living with you are defective, so they have a defective ability to look internally and come up with that concept of virtue that's the same as yours, then once they deem you defective, you're toast. And that's what's happening here.
Absolutely, yeah. If you don't agree with them, you're either too stupid, uneducated, you have some other motive at heart. Otherwise, you would agree with them. It is circular logic here. And I mean, I keep going back when you were talking about freedom so long as you're free to choose what I want you to choose. It reminds me of a Fast and Furious line where someone offers a beer and they say, you can have whatever you want as long as it's Corona. That's 100% what, and I want to be clear here. I am not a conservative. I'm not a Republican. I am liberal on a lot of my views. But that's the offer that progressives are making to smokers right now. Like, you do whatever you want as long as you quit using pharmaceutical nicotine replacement therapy. You're free to make the choice I tell you to make.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Well, and we'll see what they want to do is they don't want to tell you, right? That's why they love the kids, because they bring up the kids and the kids grow up and they just, envelop the virtue process, the thinking process. And so then that way they prefer to not tell you. That's what they'd actually prefer, because they want each person to get there on their own, so that's the key thing. Now, I just got to do a quick little promo, which is great. The folks over at Vaping magazine have done Amber Meyer wrote a great story on RegWatch, and this episode is out on shelves, or however they do that. I don't get a lot of vaping magazines. Imagine that, I don't get any. So, but I know these go to a lot of vape stores. So it's a conversation with Brent Stafford by Amber Meyer, and it's RegWatch. And it was a good piece, dove into some of our coverage over the last year, which has been fantastic. We discussed our Health Canada interviews with Director General James Van Loon. We discussed the issue around RegWatch's breaking and publishing the leaked document from Dr. David Hammond from the University of Waterloo, and we discussed that. And, oh, yeah, I guess I should have pushed the button here, sorry, so you could see that. And, the actual colonialism stuff we managed to get in there at the end. And in fact, actually, what I didn't say, and you added, which was great, Michelle, was the fact that, they're kind of mad because the white man took the Indians' drug of peace and we turned it into a drug of war.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, totally. And so that's great, guys. So, I mean, obviously our folks over here at Vaping have done a great job with covering us here at RegWatch. And I want to make sure that you know that that's out there and to go take a look. And then one last thing, and we'll get back to Michelle Minton from the Competitive Enterprise Institute, is just an absolute total get your butt over to our support microsite, support.regulatorwatch.com. We don't beg for money. But I'm going to start shaming you. I'm going to start using tactics of the progressives. There's only 2 viewers that have signed up to support RegWatch in the last year. 2.
Guys, do you want it to only be the New York Times? They're clearly no good. I mean, we need independent reporters because the journalism business right now isn't doing its job.
Absolutely. And so we need your help. So support.regulatorwatch.com. If you're in the US, when you go there, it'll be US dollars. If you're Canadian and you go there, it's Canadian. And same with pound sterling and euros. You can choose one-time support, monthly support. That would be great. We're trying to do the long tail here, guys. So we've got a lot of viewers, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people watch our stuff. And 2 of you have decided to support our show. So we're going to start shaming now. I'm just going to start using progressive tactics. That's the only thing I can think of. Michelle?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I have several Patreons going all at once because I value those independent voices so much that aren't connected with, the thing I wrote about with Fear Profiteers, which was this enormous multi-decade just leviathan. And it's difficult once you get into it to get out of it, because look what happens. You just get ostracized, you're ridiculed, you are ignored. So I personally have so much appreciation for the people who choose to go outside of whatever the leviathan is, whether it's journalism, public health, or Hollywood, and to do their own thing, because those are the only people that are worth a damn, honestly, at this point. They're the only ones who are independent voices actually looking at what's going on in the world and speaking their own mind instead of just a parrot for somebody else with a lot of money.
So what can we do? So I guess as we're wrapping up in our last 10 minutes here, and I did promise I would take a look at questions, so I should have done that. So let me ask you a question, and then I'll look for questions. Okay, so two questions. What the hell can we do about CDC and continuing to call things, e-cigarettes? Is there anything that can be done about that? And then if you can talk a bit about the president. I mean, once the First Lady has jumped in like she has, I don't know. This is all hope lost.
I don't know, is Melania an addiction specialist? Maybe she is. I don't know. Maybe it's great to have her voice in. Now, at this point, what vapors need to be doing is, honestly, they've been doing a great job. They have been, I've watched it, I talk to thousands of people every week, and they have been going to the ends of the earth to talk to people who don't vape, explain things to them, talk to their members of Congress, talk to reporters. You keep doing that. Stick with vaping. Do not go back to smoking no matter what happens. The community, this is like the Pandora's box. The cat doesn't go back in the bag. Vaping is going to be around. It's just a matter of if the government bans it, can we still get access to these products in a safe way? I'm assuming because the vaping community is so cohesive and friendly and filled with smart people that they will figure out a way to do this. What's happening right now calls for massive organization. Taking another thing from the progressives, the old progressive tactics, people need to actually get out of their homes, get off Twitter at this point, because as much as I wish facts, arguments, emotion, people's real stories mattered, they don't seem to. So we need to actually make this a problem for the regulators, make this a problem for the members of Congress. Lay down in front of state houses, lay down in front of the CDC until they at least acknowledge, get some attention, make it so that the New York Times can't refuse to cover this story anymore.
Right. So, okay. So let me make, you just made an excellent suggestion. Let me paint that picture properly now for our viewers, because you are right. They don't get it. Well, hold on. Half of our viewers are probably progressives, right? So because the only thing that's the one thing that is always an interesting thing, is that the only thing that makes a vapor know another vapor is that you were maybe once a smoker, whereas they're generally, the overall thing here is that they should be drawn from a wide spectrum of political sides. So for those that are vapors that are familiar with the tactics, you're the ones that really actually have to lead, because it's likely you are the ones that are preventing this action from happening, because you're suffering from a cognitive dissonance, because on every other issue that you're standing beside, that your friends are, they're, like if you're pro climate change, you're not likely to use those tactics that you know so well for vaping, just because you're going to suffer a cognitive dissonance.
I disagree with you, Brent. No. I've seen it with progressive vapors. They are doing their hardest. They are not sitting idly by the side. But
no, right? But they're not lying down on the White House lawn with rest in peace signs, right? Yeah, they're not walking with the Reaper They're not walking with the Reaper masks. They're not doing the strongest activism tactics that needs to disrupt traffic. That needs to
gathering people into a car, getting everybody into a car together, rallying people together, and saying we are getting off of our computers right now. And I hold myself accountable for this too, because I haven't. I've mentioned this on Twitter. I don't talk about it too often. My husband has had oral cancer twice now. It started when he was 27 years old. He was never a smoker, but that's exactly the kind of cancer you get from smoking. And I don't ever want to see anybody suffer with a disease like that. And e-cigarettes are the exact thing that could help people. So many of my friends have quit multi-decade smoking habits. They feel great. They tell me all the time. It's really time for us all to just get out from behind the computer. And my mother always said, they can't ignore you until you leave. Like, if you get in their faces, they have to pay attention to you. So I think at this point, that's what we need to start doing so that they can't ignore us. And honestly, CDC can ignore us all they want. But if news reporters start picking up on it, then they're going to have to give some attention to it. One of the things I've been trying to do over the last several months is collect people's quit stories. And in particular, I've been very focused on trying to get people who are devout Democrats or liberals, progressives, people who call themselves progressives, to talk about how they quit smoking, what type of vape they use and flavor, and how this whole conversation has made them feel about their representation in government, whether state or federal. So that what I can do with pictures and names in hand is take it to their representatives. Because I understand that vapers are all over the country of all political stripe. They can't exactly show up at show up at the houses of Congress every week, but I'm there every week. And if I can have these in hand and say, look, this is your constituent. This is one of yours. They voted for you. They will have to pay attention to that a little bit.
Well, it sounds like the industry should have had you under a lobbying contract a long time ago.
Oh, if you ask a lot of the anti-tobacco people, I've been under one my whole life, I guess. I don't know. I'd be getting a lot more money, I'll say that, if I did something like that.
So let me paint this picture. You've got 200 vapors in a state capital, small state capital. They show up on the lawn, and each of them has like a little cardboard headstone that says, died of smoking, and then lie on the ground and stick the headstone up. And have a sea of headstones, and have that planned out properly to let the media know that it's going to be there. It's a great picture. 200 of them, man, that'd be huge, right? And you do that stuff like that. That's the stuff that gets noticed.
Absolutely, and not to steal money from your show, from the people who would potentially give to your show, but I would give money to that Patreon to organize buses, airplane tickets, whatever it is, to get everybody in the same place with those headstones, to make a statement. There are so many more than 200 in any given area. Personally, at this point, if there's going to be a protest anywhere, I will drive up to 6 hours to get to it. We all really need to pitch in, and I know I'm preaching to the choir at this point. I'm saying we need to pitch in. So many people have been doing, like I said, everything they possibly can think of on this issue, but we need to organize. And I'm not sure which organization it is that can provide that cohesiveness that we so desperately need. CASA is great. The Vapers Association, they're great, but we really need to start working together and making our voices heard in an inignorable way.
I totally agree, Michelle. Well, look, I want to thank you, everybody. This is Michelle Minton, Senior Fellow from the Competitive Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C., giving us some live update on what's happening today as Trump launched his war on vaping. Thanks again, Michelle, and do keep us posted on what you're doing next.
Absolutely. Talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks a lot. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in.